Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is your brother Nafis Abu Zaid here on the night shift. My co-host is currently in Atlantic, Georgia, but he will be with us on phone. You can say your name now, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Isa, Abu Isa. And alhamdulillah, we just here doing another episode of the night shift with our beloved brother Aqil Ingram, alhamdulillah.
Nah, this is an exclusive, highly anticipated interview with our esteemed brother Aqil Ingram. By the permission of Allah Jalla wa Ala. The reason why we say highly anticipated, because he was one of the first brothers that we wanted to do an interview with before we started our series of doing interviews with different students, and he was the first one that we asked. So alhamdulillah, we can say he was a little bit elusive. Alhamdulillah, though, we finally able to get in contact, and he took out some time for us to be able to catch him. Currently at Masjid al-Haq here in Baltimore, by the permission of Allah, where he's currently the imam. Also, we call this signposts and milestones. So we're going to do a little bit of background history of our brother Aqil Ingram and some of the things and scenarios in the atmosphere of dawah at that time, during your time. So can you start off, inshallah ta'ala, by explaining, who you are, a little bit of background information, inshallah ta'ala, for the listeners, inshallah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi ma ba'd. Well, firstly, we want to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the glorious and exalted, that He grants us all sincerity and that He allows our efforts to be a benefit for Islam and the Muslims, and that He, Azza wa Jal, the mighty and the majestic, establishes Islam here in the West so that we can practice Islam comfortably in all aspects of our lives. As for myself, my name is Aqil Ingram, born Kenneth Ingram II, originally from the New Jersey area, but for about the past 7 years now, we've been settled in what's called the DMV, the D.C., Maryland, Northern Virginia region. And I'm not quite sure exactly where you want us to start. If you could ask a more pointed question, it would assist.
Yeah, like your educational background, for starters. I mean, a little bit of secular. I'm pretty sure that you have excelled secularly before embarking on your Islamic education.
Okay. So, yes, in summation, throughout the school system in my secular studies, they went very well. I was included in advanced level programs starting from the third grade forward, and it advanced to the point that before graduating high school, I had the opportunity to earn college credits and things of that particular nature. After graduating high school, I did a year of college, major in computer science initially, and then received a scholarship to the Islamic University of Medina, and then went overseas and studied there for a few years.
So prior to you receiving the Islamic scholarship, did you have any Islamic information, like meaning pretty much before going enrolling into the University of Medina? Did you have any Islamic? What was it like?
I would say to that both yes and no. So you're going back to the time period of the mid '90s, and in the mid '90s, the atmosphere was such that QSS was strongly prevalent with regards to Salafiyya at that time, the Quran and Sunnah Society. And they would have a yearly conference, and it was a whole big to-do at that time for anybody that was there or remembers. We were benefiting from a lot of the scholars that were traveling from overseas for their conferences, and many of the main speakers that were involved at that time from countries such as Egypt, such as Jordan, sometimes from Saudi Arabia, and many of the speakers that you all became familiar with, your Sheikh Abu Oasis, rahimahullah, your Sheikh Dawood Adibs, hafidhahullah, your Sheikh Abu Usama, your Sheikh Muhammad Jabalis, your Sheikh Fiyad Abdullahs, Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Adli. Many of the people were prevalent around that particular time, and other names that may or may not be coming to my mind at this time. But since we're in this area, you do have to mention others that were active at that time. Your Sheikh Ali Tamimi, your Sheikh Idris Palmers. The dawah of Bilal Phillips was very strong at that time, and beginning to influence America and American Salafis at that time in the mid 90s, S pubs began to be influential in the mid 90s in America by way of the internet, by way of their website, S pubs that everybody is familiar with. So we would say definitely that. If we're being more particular about those that I was directly exposed to, and I was under the tutelage of, from 1997, I was under the tutelage of Sheikh Abu Uwais, rahimahullah, as he was the imam of the masjid, where was my hometown, or my home area, I'll say.
Which was?
Masjid al-Bayan. Masjid al-Bayan, 209 Bond Street.
Okay,
right? Although it's no longer in that particular locale. But he was the imam there for some time. In 1999, Sheikh Dawood Adib became the imam for a few years. And I learned under him for some time as well. And others as well.
Type Isa, Abu Isa. You have any question? You have a question for our brother Aqil Ingram?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How you doing, Aqil, man? I'm sad I can't be there, man. Forgive me, man. But alhamdulillah, man, I'm there on the phone with y'all, man.
No.
Ya marhaba.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. My question is, man, it's a two-part question. The first question is, how were you affected by those who you learned from back then, whether it was, I don't know, ways or anybody else you met during the time from those elders back then? How did they influence your view on Salafiyya and Islam? And second part is, what's the difference between the effect or the upbringing of Salafiyya in the 90s to what's going to the effect that Salafiyya is having now? If you understand what I'm saying.
Okay, so the first part question is, he wanted to know what was the influence of the particular personalities that you have learned from, like Sheikh Abu Uwais, the Dawah Deebs, and so forth. What was the effect that they have upon you and upon Salafiyya at that time when you were learning from them? Mm-hmm. And the second part is, what is the difference between the Dawah, the influence of the Salafi Dawah back then in the 90s as to our current state?
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I'm being told I need to project. So,
raise over here.
We'll do our best to project a little bit better. Okay. So, in any regard, the first thing that I would say was that there was a large breadth of sincerity, of spirituality, of being connected to Allah in everything that one does, and there was this inclination, this zeal and this drive for knowledge, and to be quite honest, at that time, in the mid 90s, many of the scholars that we are familiar with their names now, we weren't as familiar with those names then. We weren't as familiar with as many of the scholars of the Gulf region, we'll say, as we are now. Many of the scholars we were hearing about or being influenced by way of, the students of Al-Albani, Jordanian Mashayikh, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bestow mercy upon Sheikh Muhammad Musa Nasr, as we just received news today that he passed away in some form of a car accident on the way to Tabuk. May Allah bestow expansive mercy upon his soul. But they would travel, they would come here, largely involved with the QSS conferences. Your Sheikh Ali Hassans, your Sheikh Salim Hilalis, your Sheikh Muhammad Musa Nasrs, and then by extension, Sheikh Osama al-Qusi, who was from Egypt, as you all know. It was really about da'wah. It was really about, in the true sense, it was really about spreading the message of Islam, and it was about Muslims becoming more involved with Sunnah, with emulating the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in their daily practices, inviting non-Muslims to Islam, establishing things, establishing life and community for the Muslims at large. There was a lot of diversity that was present, and by that, what I mean to say is that Salafiyya in no way or form was limited to the diaspora of those that are African descent. It was much more diverse at that time, so we didn't have many of those. I don't want to call them hang-ups, but we didn't have that type of a purview. I'll give an example. So at the age of 16, in 17 in 1996, some of my closest people that I was hanging out with, of course, there were people of African American descent, but the people that were my age that I was hanging out with, you have your Sheikh Kasha Khan, who was of Pakistani descent. There was another brother, Ala, who was of Egyptian descent. There's our brother Sheikh Adam as well, who happens to be of European descent. And this was, amongst others. You had your Sheikh Sadiq, Abu Abdus-Salam al-Jilani, as people now know him as. Your Abu Hafsas, Muawiyah, and Bathia, and people like this, who they were of African American descent, or of African descent, right? Sadiq, I believe he's actually from Guyana, may Allah preserve him. But this was our kind of nucleus, right? So it was diverse. But this is just to give some idea about what the atmosphere was like at that particular time. People just wanted to please Allah, become knowledgeable. We wanted to give da'wah. We wanted to spread Islam. We wanted to establish things for our people in our communities and get the right message out there.
So you feel as though during the QSS period, in that time, as you just described, you feel as though it's not the same? Like, what would be, in your humble opinion, what would be the reason, what caused the change of that? As far as people not having that zeal, the sincerity, not seeing, that breath of sincerity, that eagerness to want to help out the communities, whether it's social reform, the camaraderie amongst brotherhood and sisterhood and so forth.
Right,
but
right.
you didn't change that.
What changed it?
Normally we say QSS and then we say the SPUB era. All right, so if you think about it, you have the QSS era and then you had the SPUB era. Well, normally, not saying that SPUBs is the crux, but you had that era where
Well, we would have to insert another era into that.
Okay.
We can say the QSS era and the SPUBs era, but the interlink between the two of those and what caused the transition would definitely have to be the era of Sheikh Abu Muslima Abdullah Tawfiq. May Allah preserve him.
Okay.
And definitely during that time frame, you find some things that are interesting and some things shifting. I would say that many of us, that we were ascribing ourselves to Salafiyya, we didn't really know what it was. We didn't really understand it. And unfortunately, our first exposure and shock to truly begin to understand what Salafiyya was by being exposed to Hizbiyya, by being exposed to partisanship, and having to navigate that. That was kind of, for many of us, our first experience with.
Can you give us an example of an up-close encounter you had with Hizbiyya during that time? I mean, we're going to ruffle some feathers here. We want to ruffle some feathers here, brother.
Well. The ruffle the feather brothers. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I would definitely say that during that time period, there was a large growth, a large influx of African Americans coming to the Sunnah, and in their coming to the Sunnah, expressing that by way of claiming Salafiyya for themselves. Now, this has happened primarily from two different perspectives. You have those that were reaching out to the Warathadi Muhammad community, and they were involved with them, such as your Sheikh Dawood Adibs, may Allah preserve him. May Allah preserve him. And in fact, the masjid in East Orange that became Masjid Ahl Sunnah, it began as a Warathadi Muhammad Masjid on Lincoln Street. For those that know, you were there. We were there.
No.
and Imam Burhani at the time. Sheikh Dawood Adib is giving the da'wah and things like that. Sheikh Burhani abdicates and allows him the position there. And that became a transition. But also what you have is there was a strong reach to the prison system as well. So you have many African Americans from the Ward Muhammad community coming into Salafiyya. You have many African American Muslims from the prison system coming into Salafiyya. And with that, both of these worlds are coming in with their worldviews.
Okay.
I'll say with their worldviews. But this became highlighted, I would say, in Allah knows best. I would say during the time period of Sheikh Abu Muslima in East Orange there at Masjid Ahl Sunnah, and it is during that time frame that a person can begin to see some of a detachment from the diversity ethnically in what Salafiyya was at that time, and it became, the hue became darker. We'll say the hue became darker.
Okay. Okay, I see, Issa, you got a question. You got a question for him. I see our brother really, with the lofty terms and the speech, he's bobbing and weaving. We gotta pin him down a little bit. Inshallah, our audience would like to know. Gotta pin him down a little. Go ahead, Issa.
Hey, all right, listen. This is what I would like to ask. I would like to see your opinion on this. We see what happened, because you've been around probably longer than me or just as long. What happened this summer, with the night shift and all that stuff that happened, and the kind of the shift and change and we're watching a change in the Salafi, especially the Salafi African American community. We're watching a more moderate form of Salafiyya begin to emerge, where it's starting to bridge gaps and go into other communities and things, whether it's Mufti, whether it was a night shift, whether it was ever. Did you see this as something that was a long time coming, or was it just a result of just years of whatever we want to call the years that's been coming? Is this just a side effect of what's been going on in our communities, or was it one of those long time coming type of situations? If you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, definitely long time coming. Definitely long time coming. And again, just to connect the previous statement to what we're saying now, in my very humble estimation, again, this still goes back to the time period of Sheikh Abu Muslima, may Allah preserve him, because this is when things were established. It became the epicenter of Salafiyya in this country. And really to the extent that up and down the East Coast, up into Canada, and even outside of this country, some of the islands and the Bahamas and Trinidad, and even some of our brothers who are now with Salaf publications and things like that, it became an epicenter in many different areas, even if not in totality. So we owned the building. It was an armory, and everyone put their money up for that. Made a lot of sacrifices. Anyone that was there will remember, because we were going up there almost every Friday for Jumu'ah. You had to be there, right? You had to go. After Jumu'ah, it was normal that there was a 3-step minbar, and after Jumu'ah, just waiting a couple of minutes, the entire minbar, you couldn't see the steps anymore because it was filled with cash, right? All the people giving of everything that they had. A fully functioning school, the name of the street being changed, apartment buildings being owned by Muslims, and Muslims owning houses and having businesses and having actual true community, and there being a degree of fellowship and a feeling of ownership and onus and progress and things of that nature. When that stopped, much of that type of progress stopped as well. So throughout that transition, when many of us at that time detached from Masjid Ahl Sunnah and detached from Sheikh Abu Muslima, may Allah preserve him, at that time period, we believed that we were becoming more familiar with scholars, and we believed that we were learning more about the orthodoxy and the academics of the faith, and in many areas we were. But social development and progress and the challenges that many of us are actually facing as American Muslims were not being addressed in the way that they should. That changed. Right?
Well, what caused the change? I mean, I'm hearing reports that I'm hearing reports that Abu Muslima was one of the, if not was the, as you just affirmed, was one of the reasons, or the one who would say the first to start the detachment, separating of the masjid from different other masajids, like, Fourth Avenue, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, we let the Sunnah go forth, those who are not part of it. Like this mentality of separating brothers from brothers.
Let the Sunnah go forth and don't stop.
Stop it. Yeah, let the Sunnah go forth and don't stop it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this mentality of whoever is with us, who's not, they're against us. Mm-hmm. This mentality of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? How did that happen? If the picture you just painted was that, okay, we was a flourishing community during each orange, this was happening, was progression happened. But a lot of it stopped when other areas stopped. But you didn't touch on what was the cause.
There was a lot of, yes, there was much flourishing and there was progress, but without holistic understanding of the faith.
Okay, and
right.
From what angle did that come from? The people who was teaching us, or the people who what was the cause of that?
At that point in time, I believe that most of us would say, especially
you're in the hot seat right now, brother.
Well, I feel very cool about it.
Come get it.
Most of us would say, especially our African American brothers and sisters who ascribe to Salafiyya and were there at that time, I believe most of us would say that we were acquiring the majority of our religious understanding and practice from Sheikh Dawood Adib, from Sheikh Abu Usama al-Dhahabi, and from Sheikh Abu Muslima.
Okay.
And then from there, by extension, their guests or the people that they introduced us to and they connected us with, or the scholars that they mentioned to us or would invite to speak, and it became that type of a thing. But we did not have a firm understanding of the tenets of the faith as we should. We didn't have a firm understanding of spirituality as we should, although many of us were more spiritual then than we are now. Okay. So the sincerity was there, the effort was there,
but the knowledge, the right information weren't there.
All of the right information was not there. We were learning, we were growing, but there was something that wasn't quite filtering through to us. We believed that our brothers had knowledge at that time, and they were teaching. They were lecturing, and you know what we can say? We know what we can highlight. They were teaching, they were lecturing, but as far as having a structured method of learning, having a structured curriculum, this wasn't necessarily the
focal point or
the focus. It wasn't the focus. It wasn't the focus. We were about tapes and lectures and sermons, and for many of us at that time, it became BET. It was black entertainment.
It was black entertainment, okay.
Right? For many of us. So many of the things that we're more familiar with now, if you were to say to the average person at that time, Thalathatul Usul and Kitab al-Tawheed and Aqidah Wasatiyya, or even more so if you get into fiqh. If you said Zad al-Mustaqim to the average person at that time,
they wouldn't know what you were talking about.
No, you're talking.
All right.
No, not at all. No. You know, so that type of teaching wasn't there in a structured type of format. Okay. Yes, there were some recordings that we would get. For example, I recall benefiting from the tapes of Sheikh Abu Usama. He taught Sharh Sunnah of Baba Hadi, explanation of the Creed of Baba Hadi. I don't know if it was, I don't recall that tape series being completed at that time, but there was some introductory, level study. I remember we were very excited at that time with the tape series that had come out in the around 1997 or so, something like this, where Masjid Muslimin was still present in Brooklyn, and Sheikh Dawudi was teaching there, and he went through Usul al-Sunnah, foundation of the Sunnah of Imam Ahmed, right? Those that were around there remember the tape series. So we had some things like that, but it was not quite as structured and not quite as holistic as many of our brothers who are shuyukh now in their own right are presenting, and not quite as structured and academic as we become used to from our scholars.
So now you enter into the University of Medina, the Islam that you was exposed to. When you got to the Islam at the University of Medina, when you left there, was it a different view of Islam, or was it consistent with the Islam you was exposed to, or was it totally different through the scholars you met, through the information you came across?
I would say what we learned to be Salafiyah, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, others may have had a different experience, but when we learned to be Salafiyah, and then actually going to the prophetic city of Medina and being exposed to people of scholarship there, some of the names that you all are familiar with, your Sheikh Abdul Muslim al-Abads, your Sheikh Ubaid al-Jabari, your Sheikh Ali Nasr al-Faqihis, your Sheikh Muhammad ibn Hadi al-Madkhalis, and your Sheikh Ibrahim al-Rahilis, and on and on and on, that we had opportunities to meet or to sit with or to sit in some of their classes or their lectures, being able to start to find your way through Arabic books and try to figure things out, and it was different. It was different, in all honesty. Some of the things that we were learning in the mid to late 90s that we thought we knew, I learned, at least for myself, that wasn't it. Once we're sitting in front of these scholars and learning, there were some major differences. And this is not to say that anyone had ill intent at that time, but the depth, the girth, the detail of what was being presented, and the context of Salafiyah became different. It was no longer merely white and black. The more you learn, the more you get involved, you realize that there's a spectrum, and there's a range, and certain things are situational, certain things are conditional, and that kind of just opens up your eyes and opens up your heart to receive things quite differently.
Each, you got something for him?
My question is, to be in all fairness, I think Abu Zayd kind of touched on it, but you could let me know if he did, if it's the same type of question. Firstly, with all justice, this Catholicism we see now from the extremism that we see today in the name of Salafiyah, did it start with S-pubs, or did they just the ones who took it globally? What's the origin of this stuff? I mean, how, what transpired? Did it just happen when they came around in 97, 98, or was it already something creeping in our community anyway? And was it ever Salafiyah from the very beginning that we got? I don't know if it's a difficult question. Was it ever Salafiyah? Because my experience when I got overseas and got back, I felt like I never learned Salafiyah. I don't know if you experienced that feeling, but was it ever Salafiyah that we got in the beginning? What was it? And did those brothers as pubs, did they the ones who brought this ideology to us, or was it already in our community, just took it to a global level?
It definitely was.
That's a nice question right there. I just want to repeat it a little bit. Two things he made out from this question when I caught. One, Abu Isa is asking our brother, what is the origin of those who give us extreme version of Salafiyah now? Right? What is the origin of that? These characteristics, some we call cult characteristics and so forth. Where did that start from? And two, secondly, he mentioned another point that he said, not only where the origin come from, but when he went overseas, He wanted to know whether or not we was ever learning Salafiyah at all. Were we ever learning Salafiyah at all? And a key point, the S pubs, were they the beginning of this origin? Did they start this extreme form, or was it someone else that started it?
No, I don't believe that we can take a broad brush with one stroke and
Pinpoint it like that. Okay.
pinpoint it like that, or
paint the picture like that. Okay.
put all the weight on settler publications, and now we have a bad guy now. We can place all our problems on them, and we have to take responsibility for ourselves.
Okay.
We have to take responsibility for ourselves. So no, that some of that was still prevalent, and honestly, I believe that it goes back to the leadership of that day, the leadership of the 90s.
Okay, go back to those key personalities you mentioned before that we had in front of us, like
Right.
the Abu Muslimas, like the Abu Osamas, like the Dawah Deebs, and stuff like that.
It has to go back, and it has to go back, across the board to the leadership that we had. And one thing that we have to understand, it is very easy to point the finger in hindsight. It's very easy now to look back and say, this person did this wrong, they should have done that, whatever have you. But what many of us don't realize is the age we are now, and the responsibilities we have now, and what we're going through now, the things that we've done successfully and the things we've done unsuccessfully, with the faults that we have and our good characteristics that we have, they were our age then, going through those things then. And not all, but some of them with less exposure or less academics than what some of the brothers have now.
Wow.
And they still were able to achieve that which they achieved then.
Okay.
Right, with that. But what this brings to mind, just as an example, I recall in 1997, this is before Sheikh Dawood Adi was the Imam in Asbury Park, but he came through and he visited in 1997, I believe the year was. And this was before the major fallout with Sheikh Abu Muslima, although there were some underpinnings and rumblings and things of that nature. The first major break occurred in 1998. But he came and he gave a lecture. And this particular lecture was a lecture that for me at that time, and I was 17 at the time, but for me at that time changed my life. It changed my perspective, my view of Islam. He gave a lecture on how we view our sins. How we view our sins.
Our elder Dawah Deeb here.
Sheikh Dawood Adi. May Allah preserve him. And in this particular lecture, he was speaking about the state of the Salafis in America. But as eloquent as he is, he places words such that people knew what he was talking about if you were involved and knew. And if you didn't know what was going on, you could still benefit from the lecture. Right? He's always had that particular gift. Okay. So what he's speaking about is, in that lecture, how arrogant Salafis have become. And how we are critiquing others and pointing the fingers at this one and that one, when in reality we had begun to lose our own selves, and we had lost making muhasabah, taking our own selves to account for many of our own shortcomings, and some of those shortcomings were beginning to emerge in our communities in this and that way. Some of the things that some of our brothers and sisters in Philadelphia, unfortunately, bear the weight for, right? It didn't start there, right? It didn't start there, but some things begin to emerge in people's personal lives and their shortcomings and transitioning into becoming settled in Islam, right? The decrease after the increase of Iman, getting into that space. So he's speaking about these things, and speaking about how we need to become more worried about our own selves and what we have come into, and how we are critiquing others and thinking ourselves better than others because we are Salafi and things of this nature. But he was speaking about that particular challenge then, and that was before the level of influence that Salafi publications eventually garnered over over the American Salafis.
Okay.
So it was definitely something that existed before that time.
So we can say that safe to say that our elder Dawadi was seeing, he was actually witnessing things that was taking place and transpiring already before Salafi publication actually, rose up into the, to the station like you're saying.
Yes.
So he pretty much had saw it and showed
Yes.
us, a little bit of wisdom and stuff.
Yes.
Also,
And I don't believe that he was the only one.
It was others that actually witnessed it.
There were others. During that matter of fact, the same year, Sheikh Abu Uwais, rahimahullah, he does his famous lecture, "There Are No Scholars in the West," right, in that year. So there were people that were seeing things going on with the Salafis in their own ways, and they're trying to
salvage it in the best way they can.
The best way that they knew how.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Would you get ready to say, Issa?
So we was already sipping his be juice then at the time, basically what you're saying, to a certain degree.
In my humble estimation, I would say in 96, 97, into 98, many of us that were ascribing to Salafiyah were upon Hizbiyah. And I'm not excluding myself from that.
That was strong.
I'm not excluding myself from that. I'm not saying all of us, but many of us. And then some of us begin to wake up and begin to, detach. But we didn't understand that just detaching from something doesn't mean that you've bettered your understanding, that you bettered your application, right? In any way, not necessarily. And you carry on certain characteristics.
So this waking up for you.
With that though, and this is an academic discussion here, but I'll just open it. What we have to understand is Hizbiyah, or partisanship itself, while it can be sinful, it's not necessarily innovation. It can become innovation, but that in and of itself is not necessarily innovation. And the average person has the idea in their mind, Hizbi Mubtadi', right? White, black, right? You're a partisan, then you are an innovator. And it's not necessarily that way in all situations. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
So in University of Medina is when you found your awakening, pretty much. And sitting in the classes and the roots of the scholars is when you started to detach yourself from what you just described you was a part of at that time of Hizbiyah.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes and no. So there were a group of us, and I'll speak for myself, but the other brothers who are students of knowledge and shuyukh, and they've been around on the public platform in the circuit for some time, and you all know their names. But speaking for myself along with others, left the East Orange community, Masjid Ahl Sunnah, in 1997. Even from before Sheikh Rabi' Hafidahullah spoke in 1998. That famous lecture, when he spoke and he had given his view about Sheikh Abu Muslima at that time in 1998, that everyone knows, that was a telelink that occurred in Asbury Park in Masjid al-Bayan, in which our brother Sheikh Malik was translating it, because we had started a connection with the scholars type of a thing from that time, and we were developing something called Wasila to Salafiyya, right, at that time. And that wasn't the only. There were other things that in other lectures that we had done, but we had begun to detach from that. And as we have begun to detach from that, and we began to be in more contact with other students that were studying in Medina or connected to other scholars. For example, our brother Abdurrahman Hernando, may Allah guide us and guide him and fortify him. He was very active in Medina University at that time. He was so close to Sheikh Rabi' that Sheikh Rabi' would call him his son. We had our brother Hassan, who the last I recall is he's in the UAE now. But we had our brother Hassan, and we had our brother Idris, who they were studying in Yemen with Sheikh Muqbil. And during this time, Sheikh Malik as well also went to Yemen for a period of time, and we're being connected with these type of scholars and these type of things. So we began to move away from that, and to a degree, we begin to connect ourselves with some of the brothers at Southern Publications by way of their writings and, on the internet, their articles and things of that nature. So there was that detachment, and there was the knowledge that we have to now become connected to the scholars, right? That's the moniker. That's the war cry, right? Being connected with the scholars. So we got into that space, and we learned about Hizbiyya. We learned about the importance of minhaj, the importance of methodology, and we were trying to learn those things and become familiar with them. Many of us didn't actually understand those things properly until we actually went to study with scholars overseas, began learning on our own and things like that. So I would say it's it has several tiers to it. It's not just the on-off or one-step type of a thing.
Okay.
Along those best.
What are some of your academic accomplishments that you have achieved? I mean, some positive. I just want to learn something positive. What are some of the things that you have achieved since embarking upon the Islamic studies?
I wouldn't say that I've achieved much of anything.
Okay, so I knew that you was an imam in D.C. And we knew that you had started up an Islamic academy.
Okay.
There were some things I would call it an achievement. Some things, there were some books. There was a lot of books you have taught down there, even twice. There was a lot of things you have done for that community in D.C. Would you like to elaborate on that? Like some of the classes that you actually taught, things that you accomplished as far as that?
If we're speaking to imamate, so I've been the imam in Asbury Park at the same masjid where I came up at, Masjid al-Bayan. And of course, there's a story behind that, and a story behind everything. I was active in the Texas area, in the Arlington area, then in the Dallas area. After which, I became an imam in Atlantic City at Masjid al-Furqan, which no longer exists in more recent years. The masjid burned down. May Allah fortify our brothers there. And then after Atlantic City, I believe then came DC. And for a very, very brief period, there was the Masjid Ahlul Quran wal Sunnah in Queens, in New York.
Okay.
Where I was the imam there for a brief period.
Is that the one where Zahid is at now? Or Mufti?
Both. It's before. It was before there was that distinction.
Okay.
Okay. Right. On the Van Wyck Expressway.
Okay.
Before they purchased the new building, the church, and that they turned into the masjid. And then coming back to DC again and continuing over a 5-year. It was about a 5-year tenure that I was active in DC. That's as far as imamate is concerned. I took hiatus after the DC experience, and in my mind, I thought that it would not be as beneficial to focus on one place in one building and putting everything into that, and that it should be more of a regional approach. So we established RIDA, myself and Ustad Abdul Bari Hussein, regional dawah activity. And we started with something very simple, just a WhatsApp group. It started with that. But then from that, it branched out to about 10 different centers in the DMV. And we became very active in assisting many different communities, many of who would not, at least at that time, openly ascribe to Salafiyya. But what we found was that they weren't resistant at all, and they just wanted to know the truth and just wanted help, and they wanted the message that we were able to deliver at that time. So we did that. We did that. It was pretty successful, and even on that journey, we assisted with establishing a school in the College Park area, the Eminem Learning Center, which I believe now should be in its 5th year.
Alhamdulillah. So RIDA. RIDA is what you and Dubari and your organization assisted in establishing that actual school. So that's an accomplishment. That's an accomplishment.
Originally, the idea for the school, it started in Washington, D.C., There was a couple, Dr. Haifa, Palestinian family. Dr. Haifa, she's an excellent person. May Allah preserve her. Her and her husband came looking for assistance to establish a school, and there's some history there as well. We don't have to go into the backdrop, but we were unable to assist them, I'll say, at the masjid in Washington D.C. But I was very inclined toward being able to assist, so I continue to assist in my own capacity. And it's not only because of me or anything like that, but I assisted, was involved. It was nothing, and we built, and it's a fully functioning private school that Muslims have access to, where it's a fully functioning Quran program, and there are people there who complete the Quran. There is a full language immersion program in Arabic as well as French as well. There's an Islamic studies curriculum and a secular curriculum, and it's they've moved from the initial location, and they have a better, larger location now. And during that time, of course, I taught in the school, but I had a large responsibility. I was the director of language and theology for the school, so we're involved in setting the curriculum for the school and managing those things. But yeah, it happened.
Alhamdulillah. So there's a hadith from Aisha radiallahu anha that she asked the Prophet what was one of his most difficult times in giving dawah. So I'm going to ask you, brother, what was one of the most difficult times, inshallah, that you would say in your period of being an imam, and which region or what masjid or what area you was in that was difficult for you to be an imam? And can you please explain or describe to us some of the difficulties that you experienced?
Give us the juice. Huh?
Give us the juice. Give us the juice, right, East?
Yeah, I would say one, leaving home base, leaving the Asbury Park area, and moving into Texas at the time, but not the move into Texas. That was my first time attempting to establish something from almost nothing.
Okay.
And trying to unify Salafis. That was my first real experience with that. When I went down there, it was I was involved with we established a book publishing company called Tarbiyah Bookstore. Myself, along with two other brothers that we don't need to mention their names. One brother from Canada, may Allah preserve him, and another brother from that's from the area in Arlington, may Allah preserve him as well. We established the Tarbiyah Bookstore, a book publishing company, and I went down there to grow that, but also to assist in da'wah as well. Our brothers at the then tezkid.org, if anyone remembers that, they were in that area too. And we had about 40 families of Salafis who were scattered throughout Texas, and we thought, well, why not bring everyone together and have a masjid jami' and really begin to do some work. And there were people there who were skilled, and they were degreed, and they had the competency to do some things. So we thought we could build some things. Long story short, and I do not fault any of the brothers there for what I'm about to say. I will put it on myself, my youth, my ignorance, and my zeal. Okay. During the time period that I was there, I would say the salary that I was meant to receive, I received it 1 week. And the rest of the time that I was there was a very strong struggle, I'll say. I was a very, very strong struggle. And some initial agreements that were made were not upheld. Some of our other brothers did their best to try to pad that, right? And it wasn't their fault. But and I was in a new marriage at the time as well. So coming out of all of that, and then having to come back home, that was a very tough time period. And I'm saying this for this reason. My mindset at that time I came into what I believe was a realization at that time that with the level of the disciples of knowledge that we had in the country at that time, by and large, there were some exceptions. Just you forget out the love types, and there were some exceptions. But by and large, I personally felt that we needed a higher caliber, a higher quality of knowledge and capability than what we had at that time. And I believe that we needed to go back and to study more and to become more accomplished. And any things that we were doing that were positive, I did not think that my absence would have affected anything, right? And it's going back to the early 2000s. So, so I pulled myself out. I pulled myself out of that, and I said to myself, I'm going to focus on myself and my family. I got my CDL license, Class A, with all of my endorsements, and I started driving to take care of my family. And I was going through a learning process at that time because I didn't understand either that taking yourself out of a position or taking yourself away from a title does not change how people see you. It does not change their need for you. Right? I didn't realize that at that time. So at that time, what ended up happening was many of the different communities, I was on the circuit giving dawah lectures, traveling, that type of thing. They were still reaching out. They were still reaching out, and they still needed help. So I found myself, marriage counseling and helping administrations to do this and do that, and setting up lectures and connections and getting in contact with scholars for questions. And, all those things were still going on. But now instead of just being responsible for one place, now it's anybody that can reach me by phone, even though I'm out here driving my truck, Right. So that was a challenge. And the next strongest challenge that I would say that I faced was transitioning out of the position in DC that I'm sure both of you want to ask so much about.
We definitely, yeah, we what happened in DC, right?
In hindsight, in essence, it's a very, very simple thing. The model that we use in America for imams of masjids, and the model that we use to manage our masajid, by and large, does not work. It doesn't work. We have this concept where we have an administration. An administration is in charge of running the masjid, and they have a seat of authority, right? But of course, much of the religious aspects of management, much of the leadership aspects of management, and just having a knowledge base Islamically, or having experience with certain things that you need in counseling and in community organization, things of that nature. Many administrations of masajid don't have that, so you need the person that can do that. So we need to bring the imam, the student of knowledge, the sheikh, or whatever have you. And even though it's said that we want that as administrative body, that person is not given the degree of autonomy that the person needs to do their job properly, right? And you're looked at as you're an employee. So, but nevertheless, many of the people will see the imam or that student as the leader of the community. So they're going to them. And depending on who the person is, they'll give it their all, they'll become very active and things like that, and they'll start doing things. And they start building influence with the people. Many people think leadership is in position and title. Leadership is measured by influence. So this person begins to build influence, and build influence that may be either different or greater than that of the administrative body. And that person then may have ideas that's different than the administrative body, or the administrative body has ideas that's different than that imam. Then you're setting yourself up for a clash. Every single time. This is why, and this is from an experiential standpoint, the average shelf life of an American imam is 2 years. right? And it's not something that a career, unfortunately, can be built on. There are no, in most instances, there are no benefits. There's no insurance. You're getting paid under the table. You're not paying your taxes and things of this nature. It's not something you can build a 20 or 30-year career upon. And then even if you get that far, where's your retirement at, right? And then what's going to happen to your family, right? And these are things that I also saw coming, and looking at our elders who were becoming older than us, and our brothers such as our Sheikh Dawood Adib, may Allah preserve him, our Sheikh Abu Waisis, Rahimahullah, our Sheikh Tala Abdullah's, Hafidahullah, and me myself, I realized that if I continue down this path, there's nothing different from their selves and my selves except another 20, 30 years. You see?
It'll be time.
So, but in any regard, getting back to your question, what I described happened in D.C., and there was that clash.
That clash came about.
That clash came about with time.
Now listen, I'm going to ask some tough stuff here, right? I just want you to know that we're not going to, we're going to brush over this one.
Stick the screws to them.
Yeah, stick the screws to them. Now I know, right, and you know even better because you was actually there. Okay, you actually went to an experience that there was some key players behind the scene that was working along the administrating clash with the influence that you have to break that up and to either instigate something that was already brewing or cause a wedge between you and the administration, which caused the breakup of the actual masjid.
That happened.
That happened, right? Some of them key players, right, was from the brothers that, that we, for the past summer, have been dealing with some of their, activities and even mentioning my name and some of the things that they have been doing with the S-Pub influence, with the, so forth, and the cult characteristics and things like that.
Right.
Do you care to elaborate? I mean, what is because you was there, and I want you to open up old wounds, but so to speak, open them up a little bit.
So here's the deal.
There's some reputation, so it got some scholars got involved.
Yeah, some scholars got involved.
How do we understand?
A lot of scholars got involved.
In light of the ulama getting involved, in light of the community
resource.
A lot of scholars got involved. Those who were mentioned publicly, and others that were not mentioned publicly.
So how do we get to the point where you're running a community, you're giving classes, you're benefiting, and then there's a refutation on you, and you're not able to speak without, you're not able to come to some sort of resolve with your own intimate partnerships, because the administration is your partner.
Right.
So now outside influence comes in, scholars get involved. Where's the islah? Because that's what the scholars are supposed to bring: islah, clarity, ilm. So how do we get to the destructive? When we think of calling the ulama, is to bring some understanding. When we have a difference, we go to someone who has more knowledge than both of us, that doesn't have any connection with any of us, to judge between our differences. But when we see the ulama getting called in our communities, it's what's the catalyst for breakup.
Right.
So what are we experiencing here, and what did you go through?
Okay, here you go. So in the Washingtonian occurrence, that eventual clash that is almost always meant to happen because the model doesn't work. It happened, but the excuse that was given for it was minhaj, right? That was the excuse that was given for it, but really, it's what I said, right? Really, it's what I said, and Allah knows best. Now, throughout the time, throughout that 5-year tenure in D.C., and as I stated earlier, that is a longer tenure to have after the Imam in America. Okay. Anyway, you get half a decade in, you're doing something, right? So, but in any regard, the approach was that in Washington, D.C., in that area, and we were functioning primarily in Northeast, but the masjid was in Northeast. but then by extension, there was a Dawah Center in Southeast as well. In working with our brothers in Laurel, during the time of that particular Mestre Global was open, it's now since closed, and to the extent that we were able, also working with our brothers here in Baltimore at Dawah Tawheed as well. There was that level of cooperation, of the attempt to have as much cooperation as possible, but we wanted Washington D.C. to be its own independent entity and to be a safe haven for all of Ahlul Sunnah.
No.
Anyone from Ahlul Sunnah is welcome here. Okay, understanding that anyone from Ahlul Sunnah being welcome in that space does not negate that some people may have issues with one another. Okay, and there were numerous attempts over that 5-year tenure, mostly behind closed doors, right? Mostly clandestine. But all of those efforts were directed toward me personally. Okay, and we managed that. And I was supported in that. And as I was continuing my studies, going back and forth to Mecca and Medina to study for periods, traveling back and forth to Kuwait a few different times to study and further my knowledge and things of that nature. You build relationships and you get advice from scholars and things like that. Almost without fail, they would say, ignore them, keep doing the work. Ignore them, keep doing the work. Just do the work. Teach the people the truth. Give them the knowledge. Okay. So eventually, the tactic switched, right? The tactics that were utilized against myself, I would say, going back to at least 2004, right? Because this precedes Washington D.C., right? All the brothers that we talk about or that you're referring to, we're all the same people. We all know each other. We all came up together in the 90s in the beginning of what I was talking. We all know each other, right? We all know each other. And we were friends and traveled together. Some of us lived together and studied together, But in any regard, that was the common tactic. It was more of a clandestine approach. Sometimes it would kind of, rear itself out. But in D.C., the tactic changed after some years to, instead of trying to apply indirect pressure on me, pressure was then placed upon the administration.
The administration, okay.
That's what shifted.
Okay.
And I would say within a 2-month window of pressure being placed upon the administrative body,
that's when the clash really came to a halt.
there was a switch.
That's when
There was a switch. And then it was a push for me to change my approach with certain things or change my views on certain matters, which I was very vocal at that time that I don't believe in Hizbiyah. I don't believe in partisanship. And I was vocal about this, but behind closed doors. These are things we weren't exposing the community to, because trying to maintain unity and progress and everything that we had built. And my Aqidah is now for sale. My theology, my spirituality is now for sale, and I will continue to do what I believe is in the best interest of the people, regardless of X, Y, or Z. And that was the posture that I had taken. And the advice that we have been getting for a number of years from several different scholars was suddenly being largely dismissed for whatever those reasons are. I can't speak for those people that dismissed them. But I thought, well, then maybe if we go to some of the more senior scholars, then maybe that would assist with this particular challenge in some way. Nothing has changed because we taught the books. We taught the books, and you've seen the listing of the books that were taught. We brought scholars there, right? We brought Sheikh Salim At-Tawil, may Allah preserve him. A couple of times we brought Sheikh Falah Ismail, may Allah preserve him. And we were doing things that we could do. Sheikh Abdurrahman Umaysan would come and visit, and at least 3 times, if not more, different things that were going on. But in any regard, all of that wasn't sufficient. No problem. So we reached out to Sheikh Abdul Aziz Al-Rajihi, and we posed questions to him concerning bid'ah and ahlul bid'ah and cooperation with the people of innovation. What does that actually mean? And giving da'wah, and if we go out to their masajid to teach them, does this mean that we are not cooperating with them? And what do we do when our other brothers begin to speak ill of us because we do this? And what if they begin to break the ties with us? And we asked those questions. We did all that. And we got a series of answers that I made very public. And it was, at that time, the video's not up now, but it was a YouTube video. We posted it, the audio, and we did all that. Transcribed it, made it nice, and translated it Arabic, English, and made it available.
And the Sheikh was saying totally opposite.
Yeah.
He was actually telling you you can benefit the people.
Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Rajihi, may Allah preserve him, who I would hope people understand the caliber of his scholarship, who he is. And I don't want to detract from other scholarship by mentioning this, but and we won't. But in any regard, he was saying the same things that scholarship had been telling us for years prior, right? In other personal encounters I had in other recordings, it's anything different. And I didn't expect anything different. But I thought maybe this is what the people needed to hear. Maybe you need to hear from, from this caliber of scholar. So we came behind that and we posed questions to Sheikh Salih al-Luhaydan. May Allah preserve him.
Major scholar. May Allah preserve me.
And we mentioned and I was reprimanded about the Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Rajihi questions and answers that I posed to him. Right, behind closed doors. And with Sheikh Salih al-Luhaydan, same questions. Posed them to him.
Similar answers.
So he was more detailed in certain areas, but similar answers. We made that public for the people. Okay? This is not known. Maybe some people have seen some of those fatwa and those advices from those mashayikh, but there were other shuyukh that were lined up as well. So next we were going to seek counsel from Sheikh Wasil Abbas, who at the time, as a matter of fact, at that time in D.C., we had just cleared the 5-year visa for him to come to Washington, D.C., and we were setting that up for the people, right?
Look at that.
As well at that time. It didn't come to fruition for reasons and factors, but this period and this transition ended up being the ultimate factor as to why we were not able to bring finality to Sheikh Wasil Abbas coming, even though he agreed to come with us and be us in D.C. and all of that. And then we're going to go to Sheikh Falah after that and other scholars as well to try to clarify the issue. But after the publicizing of the statements and advice of Sheikh Salih al-Luhaydan, that seemed to be the final straw for the administration at that time. But what I will also say, in understanding what was going on in D.C., because there were different layers, there was always a group of disgruntled
members,
constituents, yes, who they wanted to see progress, they wanted to see social services, they wanted to see just different types of activities and programs and outreach and this and that and the third thing, and I was about that. I was about that. And this group of disgruntled peoples and the administrative body, for I would say at least 2 years, if not longer than that, I was trying to bring unity between both parties. Okay, unsuccessfully. But now this group, they got into a space where they were like, well, then we just need to do it the right way. Okay, they
broke off.
Huh?
They broke off, basically.
No, not that they broke off. They did start doing some. They wanted to do everything through the masjid in their programs. They did start doing them on their own outside of the masjid because it wasn't being welcomed. Okay, and then I would support to the extent that I was able outside of the masjid. Okay, I was trying to support.
Which is a further clash with the administration. Okay.
But at that time, there were challenges that the larger community was not aware of. The bylaws that were written were not being by the administrative body, and some that preceded that administrative body. There were still some that were there. They were not being adhered to. The nonprofit status of the masjid was defunct. The taxes weren't being updated.
So it became inactive. The status became inactive.
The status became inactive. The property had come up for tax sale on more than one occasion. Okay, by Allah's mercy, alhamdulillah, no one acquired the building, There were zoning issues, zoning challenges as well with the building, and there were just different things that were going on. So this disgruntled group of people, they decided, and it was during the same time period that these other agitations were rising. Okay, so their position was, well, these people aren't really the administration anyway. They're letting the master go anyway. We're going to file paperwork with the city and get everything up and running properly. So they did that. So they did that. And of course, in their doing that, they wanted to then empower me as much as possible. So they did that too. So come back to this publicizing of the advice of Sheikh Salih al-Haydan, may Allah preserve him. The administrative body decided that I would not be doing anything more at the masjid. Okay, they never actually said you're fired, you don't work here, anything like that. Okay.
But it was understood amongst themselves.
They wanted to do that. They wanted to do that. But then at that meeting, what's supposed to happen? One brother, may Allah preserve him, reward him, actually showed. This particular brother, I still love him. I would say he's like my brother. Right? We just have a misunderstanding at current. Right? But the other brothers didn't show. Just this one brother, they put it on him, right, to show and to bear the bad news, to me. Okay. And it did not come out.
The way that they
it didn't come out that way.
It didn't come out that way.
Even though I was gathering an understanding,
right.
But these other brothers were also moving. Okay. And I've written this, and there's a book about it. And you guys saw the whole book, and this is why I don't like to talk about it anymore because it's done. But in any regard, I believe that was on a Wednesday, and it just happened that they didn't want me to teach anymore on a Wednesday. On that Friday is when this new body put everything into effect. Okay. So while they told me to stop teaching, they didn't say I was no longer in the position, but they wanted me to stop doing what I was doing. This new party came in and said, no, well, you're the imam and this is what's happening. So that became a larger misunderstanding, but it was about the people. It was about guidance of the people. So my posturing was, so long as this is what is best for the people, and the people want good for themselves, and this is what the people want, we'll move forward. All right. So with those external pressures and things like that, and the opportunity to be accepted by some of our brothers who have utilized Philadelphia as an epicenter, right? To be accepted by them and be of them. Okay. A portion, a loud vocal portion of the community wanted to be with our Philadelphian brothers. Okay. So they did that. And at the point that I realized that, okay, this is not what the people want, then I myself chose to abdicate.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And in my choosing to abdicate, about half of the community stopped going to that masjid.
It was a trying time. It was a trying time, and I glimpsed this just from what I read. Your response to Sheikh, I believe it was Sheikh Ahmed Bazmour, Sheikh Abdullah Bukhari.
No, Sheikh Ahmed Bazmour.
Sheikh Ahmed Bazmour.
Hafidhullah.
Hafidhullah. And the Sheikh never responded back to you, did he?
No, not to myself, not to Sheikh Salim Tawil, not to. There were other things that were going on behind the scenes that I've never said in a public setting.
I know.
But there was no response.
But from what I read, when I actually read it, I mean, Issa read it as well. Issa, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask that question. I'm glad you brought that up. The people say, well, why do you go to the scholars? We all know that these issues have been brought to the scholars, whether it was Sheikh Rabia, whether the scholars were called on the phone, and things like that. This issue has been brought up, and rectification has been tried. Like, for example, people have invited people to come talk, invited people down to the masjid, try to have behind-the-scene meetings. So rectification has been tried. My question is, Sheikh Ahmed Bazmour, when was he called? And may Allah preserve this Sheikh, and what was his role in this whole thing? And was it that he got bad information, or did the Sheikh just, decided to speak on it without all the information on both parties? Like, how did the Sheikh get involved with something in D.C. all the way from his country? Like, why did he feel it necessary to really get involved in the politics of that particular masjid?
Well, that's. Repeat the question.
Yeah, he want to know why Brother Ace is asking our brother Aqil. He want to know how did Sheikh Ahmed Bazmoul become involved? Was he fed false information? How did he become involved, being as though he was located in his country? How did he become involved with the politics that take place in D.C.? Like, how did that come about?
Okay, so one of our dear brothers, who happens to be from your town,
From Philly. Right.
okay, who is a student of the Sheikh, that our brothers in D.C. On the administrative body, became affiliated with and wanted to be in cooperation with, we'll say. They began venting to him and to others. So he leveraged that relationship that he had with Sheikh Ahmed Bazmoul and posed some questions to the Sheikh. The response was what the response was. Okay. And that was said initially. Now, interestingly enough, the actual recording, the actual audio, never surfaced, even at request. Okay. It was never given to myself or to others. It was never given to certain other scholars that inquired about it either. What was said initially, there was a statement that interestingly changed. Initially, what was being said was that Sheikh Ahmed Bazmoul, may Allah preserve him, had directed our brothers in administration there to remove me from the position. Okay. After some and this was behind closed doors, but after some digging and asking and reaching out to certain scholars, including Sheikh Ahmed Bazmoul, and questioning certain things. I don't know if that's connected or not, but I know after that happened, there was a second statement that came out that was different than the first statement that came out. Right. But yes, so that's how that happened. That's how that happened.
And I'm sorry for having you bring that back up. You know, I mean, it was heartfelt for me when I read it, but it was just like how can you actually, someone who's been in this community for 5 years, someone who the people was actually cheering on, was actually benefiting, who started and did multiple things by the permission of Allah. We don't praise no one above, that which Allah Jalla wa Ala. But still at the same time, how can you understand what I'm saying? How can you take a statement of, whether it's a sheikh or a student, whatever, bring it to another community in a whole different region of the world, right, and allow that to cause dismantling?
Yeah, and I was never consulted throughout any of that process. I was never spoken to directly from their side, from any of our sheikhs and disciples of knowledge who were involved in that. Many of who could have very easily reached out to me or put me on the phone with the sheikh at the time that they were speaking.
But it seemed like that wasn't the goal. The goal was to actually sabotage you, so they didn't want to actually, involve you in it. Allahu A'lam. But,
Possible. Whilst conversely, when I was presenting those questions that I presented to those scholars, I offered opportunity to them. These are the questions I plan on presenting. Do you have any input? What questions do you want to ask? And that type of thing. And my questions came before their question. But I did that with them. I gave them every opportunity. But they did not give me much, I'll say. So I went forward with the questions as I saw it and how I saw the issues in the community. But on the other side of it, I would just say I wasn't afforded that opportunity. I'll say
it was something you said earlier, right before Issa go in. I wanted to mention this to you, and I want to take this time out that you can probably elaborate because you said it. The concept of administrations, and being as I'm saying this because I have experienced myself with being presiding over a masjid for X amount of times, and I know something here in the West is this concept that there's the board or the administration. And then there's the hiring and the selecting of the imam. In the Quran and the Sunnah, I don't find this at all.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. No. You only find whether you have a sultan, either the leader who appoints, or the people who selects.
Correct.
You don't. In all my research, I never found this, but it seemed like this is being a major problem, not just with the Salafi communities, also with the foreign communities. This non-profit board, these directors. and then the hiring and firing. This is why you said the lifespan was, between the life expectancy between the imams for 2 years, right?
Right.
You never keep them more because of this, right? What would be your advice, for other masajids that even embarking upon entering into a nonprofit? Because we at Masjid Ibn Taymiyyah, we got a nonprofit, but we kept our board directed to the library.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't allow the board to have any interference with the masjid.
Okay.
Like the board can't select and hire an imam. The masjid people, the congregants, have that choice whether or not who they want to be the imam or not.
Right.
But what would be your advice now, like based on your experience now?
Well. We're going back almost about 10 years, maybe a little less. But we posed questions on this topic to the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, Sheikh Aziz Ali Sheikh. Because at that time I was going back and forth to Saudi and sitting with many of the major scholars, and we had opportunities.
Okay.
We posed these questions to Sheikh Abdullah Jabbour. We posed these questions as well to Sheikh Sada ibn Sadat Tawil. Many others, all of them, and there may be others that I'm not thinking about at this time that maybe not fresh on the forefront of my mind. But you find some things that are interesting. One, and for sake of time, I'll kind of just put all the answers together, right, in summation and in paraphrasing. But one, there is no verse, there is no hadith in these statements of these shuyukh. There's no verse, there's no hadith that speaks to an administration of a masjid. So when you're asking a question about how the administration of a masjid should be structured in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah, you're not going to get that type of an answer. But rather what it is, they mention the hadith, al-Muslimun ala shurutihim. The Muslims are bound to the conditions they place upon themselves. Okay. So once the Muslims put something on paper and they sign and they agree to that, then that's what it becomes. Not because it's Islamic in its origin, but because that's the agreements that you all have placed upon yourselves. You follow? Now, in this country, the model that is utilized to both establish masajid and to maintain masajid, we don't realize, and I could be wrong, please stand to correct me, but in my experience, it's the Christian model. We're still using the Christian model. The way that they establish their churches, the way that they maintain their churches, the way that they run their churches, it is that model, right? Okay, so we don't have a plate that we pass around, right? But we have a box, right? And we do it as we go, right? Sheikh Muqbil rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned something that is phenomenal concerning the establishment of the masajid, and it is correct, and it is sunnah. You look at the prophetic model, I mean, this is what it is. That the funding, the maintenance of the masjid doesn't happen after you acquire it or after it's built. That's decided before, right? So it is meant to be a waqf. It's meant to be an endowment. So how it's going to be maintenanced is something that is figured out beforehand, so that once it is done, regardless if there is one person or 1,000 people that come to the masjid, they can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in serenity, right? So we're meant to be establishing options to make our masajid self-sufficient, right, from the onset. But that's Sheikh Bukhari, rahimahullah. But getting back to the advice of some of the other scholars that we spoke about on this issue, who should be in charge of the masjid? Should it be the imam of the masjid, or should it be the chair, right, the chairman over the masjid? And both Sheikh Abdul Aziz Ali Sheikh and Sheikh Abdullah Jabbour, they both mention that it can be either way. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, right? It can be the chairman that is over everything running the masjid, or it can be the imam that is over everything running the masjid. Along with that, the Grand Mufti's advice was, though, to the people that are coming into that position, to the imams coming into these positions, his advice, may Allah preserve him, was that the imam coming in should be mindful of the situation in that community, and whatever it is that they are used to, then he should go into that with them, right? So if what they are used to is that the imam oversees and he's the primary authority in the masjid, then he should go into that model. If it is the case that there's an administrative body that's the primary authority and he is just merely an employee, then he should go into that model. Sheikh Abdullah Jabbour, may Allah preserve him, he had an interesting vantage point in that he says he wasn't necessarily in agreement with the imam being over everything, while everybody's going to agree that the imam should be the religious authority. Right? We're not speaking about that, but over everything. Everybody agrees about the religious authority. Right? It shouldn't be people that do not have the religious acumen directing religious affairs.
No.
Okay, but what he does mention is that he says that there should be someone over the imam in the event that the imam deviates or falters. Then who's going to be over him to stop him or to check him or stop him if something goes awry? That was the view. That was the view of the sheikh. But in summation, that was kind of their discussion on that topic.
Isa Abu Isa, you got something for our brother, man? Alhamdulillah, he laid out some good groundwork, man. He's slick as he's slick as a can of oil, man. But he definitely laid out some groundwork.
I think I got so far. I'm a really man with the fish hook.
All right, really, man. Inshallah ta'ala. Go ahead. Because we got Austin coming in.
In your research, have you found anywhere where a scholar can give us, has the authority in America or any land that's not his, and tell us what our leaders should be, and appoint for us representatives of masjids, of our communities, and things like that? Or is this something that we find happening now? Or do they have any precedence for this in our Sharia, that a scholar can now has this power and has the ability to rearrange us around like chess pieces in our communities?
Did you want to repeat?
Yeah, I want to repeat. Want to say, do our brother Aqil Ingram do have any knowledge or any information from any scholars that knows about whether or not scholars who aren't from our land, more to say, who are not here, do they have any authority whatsoever to appoint a representative or leaders within our communities, even though they might be in a whole another part of the world?
Right. So, no, not in that way, not in that capacity. I believe that many of us need to begin to understand the difference between a fatwa and nasiha, the difference between an edict and advice, and learning how to interact with these items properly. When a scholar is offering direction, the assumption that is posited is that the one receiving the answer knows how to interact with it. There's etiquette. There's etiquette in asking for a fatwa being delivered, and a fatwa being delivered, an edict being received. And we are meant to understand that if something applies to our situation, then we apply the fatwa, we apply the edict. But if it does not apply to our situation, then the edict doesn't apply, right? Likewise, one that is delivering edicts, one is meant to deliver edicts on that which they are familiar with and that which they have knowledge of, not that which they do not. And to the extension of that, if one is not familiar with the mechanics of what they are advising about, and then at most it becomes a nasiha. At most it becomes advice. It's not something that becomes binding in that type of a fashion.
Yeah, they can't. You're really no compelling. You're not compelled to actually take the edict.
Right.
Okay.
You asked a scholar for his advice. He gave you advice. Right. This is the right that the Muslim has over the Muslim. Right. He sought advice. He gave advice. He fulfilled your right. Now, whether it applies or not, that is on us. We're supposed to understand that.
No. But can a scholar say, appoint so and so as your imam? Here in the West, can scholars from the East have the authority to say so and so should be your imam, so and so should not be your imam? Because you went through this.
Well, we would have to then say, you're not from the standpoint of advice. You're saying almost like it's law, like it's
law. Exactly.
Then it becomes based on whose authority.
Exactly.
Based on whose authority? On the authority of the country of that scholar. On the authority of the country of America, based on what government has empowered this person with that type of authority to be able to do that.
There you answer right there, Issa.
That's it. I think that was it. People need to understand that, because a lot of times we fell into that where they'll say this so and so, this sheikh so so-and-so said so-and-so is our imam, or so-and-so is the leader of our community, you know, and then a lot of times these people don't even be born or natural citizens of the country or from that particular tribe of people, and it's like they say a scholar say he's our leader. You're looking around like, well, we have qualified people who can lead our communities, and it's like it's kind of like a slap in the face. That's why a lot of people ask me this question. That's why I wanted to ask you this, because it is like a slap in the face.
But not only that, to add to that is what you said before. The person given the fatwa need to know the mechanics of that particular place or familiar with that ruling he's given that could it be applied or not be applicable.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, it's the principle, right, that you're all familiar with. الحكم على شيء فرع عن تصوره. The verdict on a matter is premised upon the dynamics of the issue.
Exactly.
Right? So we have to understand the dynamics of an issue before we can begin to speak about it.
But predominantly in the Salafi masajids, quote unquote, this is the norm here. Where we have, let's call back over to Sheikh so-and-so, and Sheikh so-and-so is actually in charge of a masjid that's all we hear in the West. And now whatever Sheikh so-and-so say, this is what happened. This is what the administration had in terms of using the statement of Sheikh Ahmed Bazmoul, whether or not it's true or not. But they was using that statement as, okay, we have that, and Sheikh saying remove, so we can remove the brother based off of a statement of, as tribute to a scholar. You know what I'm saying? And this is one of the biggest fitness, inside the Salafi communities.
We'll
Removing and appointing and,
We'll forward that discussion.
Okay.
And because we're speaking about myself and things I was involved in, I won't speak about other people's issues or challenges. But I'll say that there was another masjid in our country that was receiving similar challenges, because if you really pay attention, what you'll find, I don't know if the battery is going, but what you'll find is that these were strategic moves, right?
No.
This was about real estate, okay? So you'll find a pattern. What happened in D.C. didn't start in D.C. There was a pattern, okay? You find certain things happening in New York, okay? You find certain things happening at, we'll say, what historically has been the primary masjid in Philadelphia, okay? You find certain things happening at what became the primary Salafi masjid after Masjid Ahl-Sunnah in the Newark area happening, okay? After that, there was further pressure applied to D.C., but we still had our stronghold in Safe Haven. So then it jumped. It jumped to Richmond, Virginia, okay? Then there was pressure applied in the North Carolina area, okay? And then it came back to D.C. after that. That's when it hit, okay?
Yeah, that.
But to forward this discussion though, one of these masjids, right? I'm doing this on purpose. One of these masjids that was in a similar situation was given certain type of advice from one of our scholars. May Allah preserve him. This advice was then mentioned to Sheikh Saad al-Luhaydan, and he mentioned that such and such scholar doesn't have the authority to tell you all to do that. You could tell him I said so, right? And he mentions that you all know what is best for your community, and you all know your people best. You know your situation best. So you all select amongst your people who you deem fit to have authority over you and to handle your affairs.
MashaAllah.
This was the advice of Sheikh Saad al-Haydan for that masjid and those people, right? But that audio was buried too.
Barakallahu feek, brothers and sisters. Stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to do a more out setting with our brother Aqil Ingram, actually in the field, so to speak, showing him doing that as a social activist, working with different communities. He currently works with 2 masjids. He's an imam of the masjid we in now, Masjid al-Haq, and he also, this on the Islamic way in Baltimore, and he also currently help out with another masjid known as Masjid Ihsan, which we just had a chance to actually see in both masjids. The next time we would do a part 2, and hopefully Isa will be actually in the building at this time, bi'ithnillah, physically, alhamdulillah, inshallah. And we want to thank our hosts, our